My first day out, the young bloods hooked me up with this fine young thing, but when she come in my room, I told her I ain't used my thing in 50 years. So she said, pop a blue chew pill. I told that heifer I could pop a blue chew, a red chew, a purple chew, and my thing just ain't gonna work. It's been 50 years. But gal, if I'd have ran across you back in 1969 or 70, when I was young, I'd have put this rattlesnake on you and would have had you bringing me all your money.
Alright, you kids get to bed, I get the storybook.
Gangster Government Part 2. Larry Hoover saves America during World War GD. The night sky over Chicago lit up with real fireworks, mixed in with firearm fireworks as thousands of Gangster Disciples flooded the streets in celebration. It was an event unlike anything the city had ever seen. Larry Hoover, the legendary founder of the GDs, had been a free man for 6 months now. Though his actual 74th birthday had passed months ago while he was still behind bars, the disciples deemed it unacceptable to let such a monumental occasion go uncelebrated. The numbers 7 and 4 held deep significance. The letters G and D were the 7th and 4th in the alphabet, making this particular birthday a divine symbol of power and legacy. Grant Park, usually a place for peaceful gatherings and family outings, had transformed into a spectacle of blue and black. Banners bearing Hoover's face hung from light poles, and murals had appeared seemingly overnight. Music blared from massive speakers as disciples from across the country converged. Their unity and overwhelming force that Chicago's law enforcement dared not challenge, especially so since Hoover and the GDs were a direct result of a 70% crime reduction rate in the city. At the center of it all stood the man himself. Dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, Hoover exuded an aura of control and wisdom. The decades spent behind bars had not broken him. If anything, they had sharpened his mind and deepened his influence. He stepped onto a grand stage erected in the park, raising his hand to quiet the roaring crowd. "My people," he began, his voice steady and commanding. "Tonight we celebrate not just my freedom, but the strength and discipline that has kept us standing through all these years. We are not just a gang, we are a nation. And from this moment on, we will show the world what the Gangster Disciples are truly capable of. If you're proud to be GD, say hell yeah." The crowd erupted in cheers. But as the celebrations continued, murmurs spread among Chicago's politicians and community leaders. The GDs had maintained an iron grip on the city's underground for decades, but Hoover's return and the sheer scale of his following suggested something more, something powerful, something dangerous. And soon, the murmurs turned into whispers of a radical idea: Larry Hoover should run for mayor of Chicago in the upcoming mayoral race. The morning after the celebration, Hoover sat in the sunlit parlor of his newly acquired mansion on the south side. He sipped black coffee as he overlooked the city he had once ruled from the shadows. Now he had the chance to shape it in broad daylight. His closest advisors and high-ranking GD members filled the room, some seated, others standing. The air was thick with anticipation. "You heard what they saying, Mr. Hoover?" Big Dre asked, breaking the silence. "They want you to run for mayor." Larry exhaled deeply, setting his cup down. "I ain't no politician," he said flatly. "Politics is dirtier than. What do these young knuckleheads call them these days? Ops. Politics is dirtier than our ops." "Maybe," said another disciple, "but you already run the city in ways these politicians never could. Imagine what you could do with the law on your side." For the first time, Hoover considered it. The power, the influence, the ability to rebuild Chicago in his image. It was a tempting thought. But before he could respond, his phone, which he was still trying to, unknown caller. He answered, "Who is this?" A familiar voice came through, calm, measured, yet commanding in its own right.
"Hey, Larry, it's Barack Obama. We need to talk, sir."
Hoover leaned back in his chair, gripping the phone tightly as Barack Obama's voice echoed through the receiver. It had been years since they last spoke, but the former president's tone carried the same weight it always had.
"Larry,"
Obama continued,
"Chicago is at a crossroads. The people see you as a symbol of change. If you run for mayor, you'd have my backing, and after Chicago, you can do the same thing in Atlanta, Los Angeles, Jacksonville, and every other town in America."
The room fell silent. The men around Hoover exchanged glances, stunned by the unexpected endorsement. Big Dre, usually the loudest in any room, found himself speechless. Obama's words carried undeniable influence, and an offer like this was unprecedented. Hoover remained quiet for a moment, processing the gravity of the situation. "And what's in it for you?" he finally asked. Obama chuckled softly.
"You have to make me an honorary member of the gang, brother. I want some rank in it, though."
There was a shocked silence in the vast room before Obama chuckled, revealing that he was just joking.
"I want to see Chicago thrive. And let's be real, no one knows these streets better than your boys. The city's been drowning in crime and corruption for decades. If the way you began turning things around can continue, we will be on the map."
Hoover rubbed his gray-haired chin. The idea of officially holding power, of using his influence to continue cleaning up the city with more resources, becoming more appealing by the second. "I'll think about it," Hoover said at last. "I hope you do," Obama replied, "because whether you like it or not, this city is already looking to you for leadership. It has sensed that old racist bastard gave you that pardon." The call ended, and Hoover sat in silence, staring out the window. The city skyline stretched before him, a reminder of all he had built and all he could still change. Finally, he turned to his men and nodded. "Let's get to work." 2 days later, Hoover's announcement shook the political landscape of Chicago like an earthquake. The moment he declared his candidacy, it became clear that this would not be a typical mayoral race. With Obama's backing and the full force of the GDs behind him, Hoover's campaign became a movement, one that terrified the establishment. Billboards went up overnight, citywide events drawing tens of thousands of supporters. Hoover's message was clear: Chicago needed leadership from someone who had lived its harsh realities and survived them. His opponents, primarily Caucasian career politicians, scrambled to counter his growing influence. Attack ads flooded the airwaves, painting him as a dangerous criminal masquerading as a leader. Headlines screamed, "Gang leader wants to run the city," literally. But Hoover didn't back down. He had spent decades being demonized by the media and the government. This was nothing new. Instead of fighting back with mudslinging, he focused on his plan to rebuild Chicago. He toured the most crime-ridden neighborhoods, speaking directly to residents about his vision. Then came the debates. Standing on stage against his opponents, Hoover was calm, articulate, and unshaken. When one of his rivals attempted to discredit him by bringing up his past, Hoover leaned into the microphone and responded, "I've seen the worst this city has to offer. I've lived it. And that's exactly why I know how to fix it." The crowd erupted in applause. The momentum became unstoppable. As Election Day approached, polls showed Hoover leading by a landslide. The city was ready for a change, and he was the only candidate who truly represented it. And when the results came in, history was made. Larry Hoover was the new mayor of Chicago, Illinois. While Mayor Hoover was popping bottles with a few of his disciples, President Donald Trump's second term was turning into a shit show. The Orange Man came into the year with an iron-fisted approach to foreign policy, determined to reassert American dominance, imposing severe tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China, sanctioning Russia, and pressuring smaller nations into unfavorable trade agreements. His fiery rhetoric alienated allies and strengthened adversaries. Instead of bending to America's will, the global powers pushed back. A secret summit was held in Moscow. Russia, China, North Korea, Mexico, and Canada, the very nations Trump had sought to strong-arm, formed an unprecedented alliance. The world watched in stunned silence as former adversaries stood shoulder to shoulder, united against the United States. As tensions escalated, American intelligence intercepted reports that the alliance was mobilizing. Military analysts predicted war was inevitable. In a desperate move, Trump issued a nationwide call for military enlistment, but Gen Z had different plans. Unlike the generations before them, men and women born in the year 2000 and later had no interest in fighting a war they saw as unnecessary. Social media erupted with hashtags like #NotMeWar, and thousands of young men burned their draft cards on live streams. Protesters flooded the streets, demanding an end to Trump's draft. Faced with imprisonment or deployment, many opted for jail, overwhelming the already overcrowded American prison system. The U.S. military found itself in crisis. There simply weren't enough willing soldiers to defend the nation against an attack. A few weeks later, on a cool Friday evening, just as rush hour hit San Francisco, the unthinkable happened. Chinese warships disguised as Sheen and Timu cargo vessels stationed in the Pacific, launched a devastating missile strike at the Golden Gate Bridge. The explosion was catastrophic. Thousands of cars plunged into the bay as the bridge crumbled. The city skyline was shrouded in smoke, emergency sirens blaring in all directions. Live broadcasts captured the sheer devastation, and the nation watched in horror. For the first time since 9/11, America had been attacked on its own soil. Panic spread like wildfire. Cities across the country went on high alert. National Guard units scrambled to secure borders and vital infrastructure. But while America's eyes were fixated on San Francisco, another attack was underway. At the U.S.-Mexico border, authorities had grown accustomed to monitoring immigrants and drug smugglers. But this time, the threat came disguised as something far more sinister. Mexico has spent months covertly moving prefabricated homes across the border. Wide-load tractor-trailers carried the structures under the guise of new housing developments. Once they reached downtown Houston, the homes were offloaded, seemingly part of a rapid expansion project. Then the tanks rolled out. Hidden inside the prefabricated homes were fully operational Mexican armored units, provided by their allies, the Russians. Within minutes, the streets of Houston became a war zone. Tank missiles struck skyscrapers and gunfire erupted in all directions. The local police were no match for the invading force, and the city descended into chaos. With two major cities under siege, America faced another one of its darkest hours. The world was no longer at the brink of war. War had already begun. As news of the attack spread, the U.S. government scrambled for solutions. The military was stretched thin, and Trump's forced draft had failed, only yielding 27 soldiers in the entire country of over 300 million citizens. With Gen Z refusing to fight, Trump faced an impossible decision. The country needed an army. And after some quick brainstorming, he knew exactly where to find one. Desperate for manpower, Trump sat in the Oval Office brainstorming until a light bulb turned on in his small, wee-sized brain. He decided to turn to an unlikely figure, Larry Hoover, the notorious founder of the Gangster Disciples, now mayor of the city of Chicago, had spent decades behind bars but still commanded immense loyalty from thousands across the country. In an emergency closed-door meeting, Trump made Hoover an offer: mobilize his Gangster Disciples to fight for America. And in return, Hoover would receive unprecedented political power. To sweeten the deal, Trump signed an executive order reinstating Black History Month in the country and would issue $12,000 reparations check to every American citizen that had at least a quarter of Black in their bloodline. At the mention of 12 bands for reparations, Hoover agreed, knowing that his people deserved 12 million, but not being greedy.
Now, I'm glad I let that boy out of jail. I'm going to give those people those checks too, after I sign each and every one of them so they know it was me that issued them. Can't believe I'm doing this, but these bastards are invading us, so I have no choice.
Sorry, folks. Quick commercial break.
Wait a minute, y'all. I gotta have some words with Mr. Larry Hoover. First of all, I want to know why you joined forces with that orange idiot. I understand you've been in prison since before I was born, and you may not know everything going on out here in the free world, but that asshole just might be the Antichrist himself. Oh, wait a minute. I forgot to tell y'all that if you haven't liked and subscribed to this video yet, please take a few seconds to do that now. Help this GK David Movie Stories YouTube channel out, just like I'm trying to help Mr. Hoover out. Now, back to you, sir. I understand that man got you out of prison after a half a century, but helping this piece of shit fight World War III using our brave Black men that's in your gang is just wrong, especially since he just banned Black History Month in America. I need you to DM me after this video so I can catch you up on everything. My name is Representative Jasmine Crockett out of Texas, or one of the only ones going after this makeup-wearing moron.
The GDs would now fight for the country. The gangster mayor wasted no time. He reached out to the exiled GD faction that called themselves the real GDs, offering them a chance to return to the nation if they were willing to go to war. Bloodthirsty and eager to turn up, the renegade GDs agreed immediately. Thousands of YNs, once scattered and disorganized, now had a single purpose: to defend America under Hoover's command. Mayor Hoover worked with Trump's military generals and devised a military-style strategy dividing GD forces into regional battalions. Major cities were fortified with GD units trained in urban warfare. They weren't just fighting for the U.S., they were fighting for their own survival, because if China, Russia, Mexico, Canada, and North Korea took over America, they would be victims too. Immediately, the half of the GDs were deployed to Houston to push back the Mexican invasion. Using guerrilla tactics, street warfare, and an intimate knowledge of the city, they began reclaiming the streets. Tanks and missiles were met with ambushes, hit-and-run strikes, and brutal counterattacks. With the Golden Gate Bridge destroyed, the GDs worked with rogue U.S. military factions to strike back at Chinese forces attempting to invade the West Coast. Hoover's leadership proved more effective than the fractured traditional military structure. Russia and North Korea deployed troops to American soil, escalating the conflict. Cities like New York, Atlanta, and Los Angeles became battlegrounds. Seeing an opportunity, black and minority militias across the globe pledged allegiance to Hoover's cause, seeing him as a revolutionary leader. With power came internal strife. Some GD military units wanted to continue the fight, while others sought peace. Hoover faced his toughest challenge yet, keeping his army unified. Despite heavy losses, the U.S. and its newfound street army managed to repel the enemy alliance. Trump was hailed as the unlikely hero of World War III by white media, but U.S. citizens knew who really was behind the war victories: Hoover and his GDs. As America recovered, Hoover's newfound political power led to whispers of a presidential bid in 2028. With his war victories, resources, and influence, he stood at a crossroads. Would he return to the shadows or take the ultimate seat of power? The future of America was now in the hands of a gangster-turned wartime leader. Hoover for president 2028, folks.